Colleagues, we'll get started. It's 3:30. I'd like to, first of all, bring this meeting to order and remind all my colleagues that we also have departmental officials who are in front of us. So what I'd like to do is have the officials introduce themselves to start with, and then we'll get into clause by clause. And if there are any questions before we start, please feel free to put them, and then we'll go from there. Let's start with Mr. Arbiter.
Hello, my name is Richard Arbiter, and I'm the Director General for International Security Policy at Global Affairs Canada.
Thank you. My name is Wendy Gilmore. I'm the Director General for the Trade and Export Controls Bureau at Foreign Affairs.
Hello, I'm Shelley McGuinness. I'm legal counsel. I'm with Department of Justice, and I'm assigned to Global Affairs Canada.
Hello, I'm Carolyn Noble, Director General and Deputy Legal Advisor at Global Affairs Canada.
Thank you very much for appearing. And so, colleagues, as is generally the case in legislation and clause by clause, if there's any technical advice you'd like to have, we have our officials here to help with that. So I'd like to begin with the chair calling clause 1 of the agenda of the piece of legislation, C-47, which we are studying and looking to go clause by clause today and in the future if necessary. Is there any discussion on clause 1? If not, shall clause 1 carry? Carried. Shall clause 2 carry? No discussion. It's carried. Up, Mr. Ziad Abouteif, please.
Question to either of the panelists on how do they see this change, or that proposal is going to change the ministerial authority over making the decision on export?
Shall we just, Mr. Chair, shall
Sure.
we respond?
Ms. Gilmore, please.
Yeah.
So, thank you very much for the question. In establishing legal assessment criteria for the administration of export permit applications, the Minister will be considering very similar criteria to what we already consider as part of the process, but these will be legally binding, so she must demonstrate that she has considered each one of those before making a decision or determining the outcome of a permit assessment. Where we have general export permits in place or other administrative efficiencies, the Minister will still have to demonstrate that she has taken these considerations into account, but it would be then in a, with respect to all of the types of permits under a particular general permit. So the criteria consistent to what we already have, but we're going to have to document the explicit consideration of each of these elements.
And what will that, one more question, what will that benefit the process, and could that process be lengthy sometimes to go beyond the time arrangements or the contract arrangements?
We'll have to, as a department, do a full assessment of the implications of the Act once Parliament decides exactly what to adopt. From an administrative standpoint, we will be doing our very best to adhere to the public service standards that we currently have for export permit applications, which is 10 days for fairly simple permits, 40 days for more complex permits, and then for those permits that are to areas that are subject to sanctions law, there's a two-track process. First, they are considered in light of Canadian economic sanctions, then they go through the export permit assessment.
Okay. No further questions. Clause 2, carried. Clause 3, seeing no discussion, it's carried. Clause 4, seeing no discussion, it's carried. Clause 5, Mr. Abouteif, Clause 5 was one of your colleagues, but he's not here. What's your wish?
I don't see it here.
It's here.
We would like to come back to it, if that's okay.
Okay, so you would like to table it?
Yes.
It's unusual. Generally not done, to be honest. So
Because my colleague is not here, and we just want to get some
I
time
noticed
to-
that, but, we started 3:30. So can I get consent of my colleagues to table Clause 5?
Nice, Mr. Chair, if you can deal with it. Can you speak on that? Is that?
I would rather have my colleague here.
Okay, Madame Lavisière.
Écoutez,
I understand that the person who submitted the amendment isn't here to talk about it, to discuss it, but at the same time, I think it's unusual, to say the least, to not discuss an amendment now. Before I can decide further, I'd like to know, if we skip this amendment now, how you plan to proceed. Would it be at a future meeting, or would it be later today?
Significant concern. So because the member's not here, the amendment is withdrawn. So are there any further discussion on Clause 5? Seeing none, it's carried. Clause 6. Seeing no discussion, it's carried. Clause 7. Seeing no discussion, it's carried. Clause 8. Now, I want to bring this to your attention. There are two sub-amendments to Clause 8. So we will hear Clause 8 from Ms. Vanderbilt, who's presenting a motion, but then we will go to sub-amendment 1 from the NDP, and we will vote on that one, and then we will vote on the second NDP amendment before we vote on the Liberal amendment, correct? It's understood? Okay. Madame Vanderbilt, please.
Yes, so thank you very much. And I don't think I need to read this one because I believe everybody has it in both French and English. So I'll just talk about the rationale behind it. This is an amendment that comes significantly from the testimony that we heard. And although by law, if the Arms Trade Treaty Article 7 is put into regulation, it has the same force of law as it would if it's in the legislation. What we did hear is from multiple witnesses that was something that caused some concerns. So what this does is it actually takes all of the Article 7 of the Arms Trade Treaty and puts it in the actual text of the legislation. So there are a number of other things that that is changed in this amendment. One of them is that on all of the sections that have to do with the Arms Trade Treaty, we have changed the word may to the word shall. Now, this is a significant change because right now it says that if any of the Article 7 human rights violations in the Arms Trade Treaty are likely to occur, the minister may take action. What we're suggesting is that it be changed to the minister shall take this into consideration. And I think that that's a significant change, which is through the clauses that have to do with the Arms Trade Treaty. We did not do that in the first one because it actually isn't to do with the Arms Trade Treaty, which is something I can discuss when the sub-amendment comes forward. But the other change that is in this particular amendment is under substantial risk. And of course, right now, we really need conclusive evidence before a permit is not given because of the risk of human rights violations. But and in the Arms Trade Treaty, the term used is overriding risk. That is something that that doesn't necessarily appear in Canadian jurisprudence. So I've decided to put in substantial risk, which is something that I see that in 3 out of the 4 amendments, actually the wording is substantial risk. So 2 of of the opposition amendments that came forward. I know there's one that talks about reasonable risk. One of the reasons I use substantial is, first of all, it is more common in Canadian jurisprudence to say substantial, and substantial is a quantitative thing. Substantial actually says an amount, whereas reasonable is a subjective thing. So those are the three main changes that we're putting in. I think that what this really represents, and we saw this in the minister's testimony as well, it strengthens the legislation, Bill C-47. It puts the Arms Trade Treaty language into legislation, into Bill C-47, strengthens the wording so that the minister shall take action, or shall take into consideration, and it, for the first time, actually says that if there's a substantial risk that something is going to be used for human rights abuses, gender-based violence, and that's another thing that is now in the Act, which wasn't before, are the words serious acts of gender-based violence or serious acts of violence against women and children. So I think this addresses most of the concerns that were raised by civil society and by the witnesses, and I think it certainly strengthens the actual legislation.
Okay, is there any further discussion? It's a fairly lengthy amendment, and so we can go to further discussion, or we can go to the NDP amendment, and then you could speak to it in its entirety if you like, Madame Lavillière.
Je pense que je préférerais
I think I would prefer to talk about the amendment first because it would simplify things later on. Is that possible?
Oui. Alors d'abord,
Yes. First, I appreciate this amendment. I think it's important to include the idea that the minister shall take into consideration. We know 6 and 7 of the treaty use the expression shall not authorize. And we know that there are a number of witnesses from civil society, the Rideau Institute, Amnesty International, Project Plowshare, all said that this element should be included in the bill. Ms. Mason told us that if it weren't included in the bill, Bill C-47 wouldn't respect the letter or the spirit of the Arms Trade Treaty. So I think this is a very important change. I'd also like to clarify the fact that when we say currently, it's as if we'd have to have conclusive, strong evidence that it will be used to commit human rights violations. In fact, current practice isn't that. Current practice is to say that if there's a reasonable risk, the permit in principle shouldn't be issued. So that's just to correct the record. I have to say as well that including this obligation of sorts for the minister seems essential to me. As you know, we've pushed a lot on this, and I'm pleased to see that this step has been taken on the other side of the table. So I really welcome this amendment. Similarly, the matter of including criteria in the bill, the criteria that are in the Arms Trade Treaty, I don't share my colleague's opinion that it has the same value in an act as in regulations. That's why it's something we've pushed very hard on. I think it's very important to have all of these aspects, including the aspects that have to do with gender-based violence, which is a rather innovative aspect of the Arms Trade Treaty. Once again, this is in response to requests that have been made by Anna MacDonald from the Coalition for Arms Control. She was very clear on this. Alex Neve. We've heard from many, many people. Alex Neve, of course, I'll specify, even though many people already know he's from Amnesty International. There's also the Rideau Institute. So the idea of including the criteria in the act itself offers more transparency and a better guarantee. And it's always possible, as has been said, to add more criteria in regulations afterward. So that flexibility is still there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Final comments from Madame Vanderbilt, please.
Oui, je suis d'accord.
Yes, I agree. That's why we're putting Section 7 in the legislation. That's why we've made the amendment. Furthermore, for the word reasonable,
I know that in English, the word substantial is actually used in the criminal code. It's used in the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. It's something that has actual legal meaning, and it's used in Canadian jurisprudence. The word reasonable in Canadian law, the only law that it's in English is in the Statute of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions Act. So I think the criminal code, because it's been defined, and in fact, if you look at the International Committee of the Red Cross, they just released a publication that says that the words substantial actually is in compliance with the Arms Trade Treaty, and it's actually much more clear. So there's a publication called Arms Transfer Decisions Applying International Humanitarian Law Criteria, and they actually say that the word substantial is would be the correct and more likely one. So just in terms of language, that would be why I wouldn't support the sub-amendment, the particular one that talks about reasonable. And then I think this was Ms.
We haven't moved that sub-amendment yet.
But
We're
she
just
spoke to
still
it.
talking, well,
Okay.
she may have veered
And she-
off the path a little bit.
Okay, so I'm
but-
just replying to what
So if I
she-
could stop it there.
Okay.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment proposed by Madame Vanderbilt? If not, then we will go to the sub-amendment, changing that amendment by Madame Lavadière. So could you speak to that now?
Well, for the sub-amendment 1, désolé, bon, j'oublie, tant que...
as long as I don't start speaking Spanish, things are relatively under control.
Le sous-amendement...
So, sub-amendment 1, it can be withdrawn. I think it's covered by what Ms. Vandenbeld has suggested. I would, however, take the opportunity to say that I think reasonable and raisonnable have the same meaning, and that it's been applied, especially in terms of policy, rather than through legislation.
Sub-amendment 1 by the NDP is withdrawn.
It's 2, actually.
No, we are now going to sub-amendment 2. Madame Lavadière.
Amendment 2 was the one you just spoke to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're on sub-amendment 1. Have you withdrawn sub-amendment 1?
I'm with... Je retire le...
I withdraw sub-amendment 2. One rather.
Ça y est, je vais parler espagnol.
Okay, I'll speak Spanish.
Sub-amendment 1. We are now on sub-amendment 2. Could you speak to that, please?
Yes, just a minute, please. Je vais retirer le sous...
I will also withdraw sub-amendment 2.
Amendment 2 has been withdrawn. Having seen that, we are now on the amendment proposed by Madame Vanderbilt. Is there, as there's been discussion, We will now put the question. All those in favor?
Hold on, which one?
We are now doing, both
Okay,
their
but-
amendments are withdrawn. We are
They
now
withdrew
on
both.
your amendment.
Okay.
So just follow the chair. It's a
I
much
just want to make sure
quicker.
that they withdrew both, if that was the
Well,
intention.
they have,
Okay, good.
yes. Ms. May, before the vote.
Yes, because I just wanted to clarify the status of my amendment before the vote.
Yes, those will not be moved once this amendment
That's
is
why I would
passed.
request the floor now.
You have the floor.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I briefly make what I must do in every situation such as this is remind the committee that I'm here because you passed a motion that requires me to be here so that I don't have the right to put forward this amendment at report stage, which I would have vastly preferred. So in my brief opportunity to speak to this, I'm very gratified to see the government move an amendment that strengthens the bill. It obviously would nullify the one that I put forward. I just wanted to say briefly that it is a significant improvement to ensure that the minister's requirement to carry it, to consider the risks, that it's now mandatory and not merely discretionary, assuming that my friend Anita's amendment is passed, that will in fact strengthen this legislation. I do need to just put on the record, with your permission, Mr. Chair, the deep regret that we've not fixed the U.S. exemption loophole, which remains in C-47, unless someone in the course of this committee, clause by clause, is able to amend that section of the bill in order to say that we will track U.S. sales and close what has generally been described by most of the groups before this committee as the loophole you can drive a tank through. But I appreciate the moment to support the amendment the government's putting forward. My amendment is put forward, and I have no power to withdraw it or not. It is deemed, under the terms of the motion this committee passed, deemed to have been moved, and my opportunity is merely to come to speak to it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Madam May. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment as being proposed? Pardon me? Ms. Vanderbilt's amendment. The other two were withdrawn, so there's only the one. Any opposed? Okay. Carried. So amendment clause 8 is approved. And then we will go to other amendments within clause 8. I'm going to get to you just in 1 second. Also, if the Liberal amendment is adopted, the Liberal, well, we'll get to that, which is Amendment 3 that the Liberals are presenting will also be adopted as a consequential, but we'll remind you of that when we get to it as well.
Mr. Chair, could you repeat that? I didn't get that very clearly.
The Liberal amendment number 3 that's in the package will also be adopted because it's a consequential amendment, but I will remind you of that once we get to it. Again, but I just wanted to let you know in advance. That's the ruling of the clerk. We are now, as I think, which one are we on now? Oh, I thought I did. If Liberal amendment that we just passed, Madame Vanderbilt, is adopted, the NDP 1, PV 1, and the Bloc Québécois 1 cannot be moved as they amend the same lines. So would you like to speak to this before we move on? I don't know the name of the member. I can't see his name from here. Mr. Thériault. Luc?
Oui, bien, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, if I look at the amendment from Ms. Vandenbeld, it concerns the lines from 11 to 23, whereas our amendment concerns an addition after line 23, so I don't see why we wouldn't discuss our amendment.
Just give me a minute. Give you the technical response.
L'amendement de Madame Vandenbeld.
Ms. Vandenbeld's amendment replaces line 11 to 22. Yes? 11 to 23, page 4? Yes. lines 11 to 23 in the French, page 4. Votes 13 to 14. So the lines you wanted to amend have disappeared, so you can no longer amend them. One line can only be amended once. That's why we can't. Are you talking about our first amendment or our second amendment? The first one. Oh, okay, yes.
Need for explanation. Then, of course, we will go to NDP 2. Mr. O'Toole.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's my understanding, and I have to admit it's with a bit of surprise, actually, that the First Amendment, rather than tabled with a whole series of pieces of work on our agenda, was somehow withdrawn. So I would ask for unanimous consent of my colleagues, all present here. C-47, as we all will recall, before Christmas, we took it off our sort of action list because we were advised that a series of amendments were coming from the government. And we've worked in the spirit of goodwill to see that through. Today, given the tariffs imposed by President Trump on our aluminum and steel industries, I did a brief media discussion after question period, which held me up by a couple of minutes for coming to this meeting. In many ways, I was standing up for the thousands of members of the United Steelworkers and organizations like that are concerned about these tariffs. In light of that, and with my friends in the NDP here, I would hope they would see that it's our responsibility, following such rash action from our largest trading partner, to be part of the solution to push back. So considering that was why we could have tabled CPC 1, which was out there as a suggestion from stakeholders we heard from, why it might have been withdrawn, to me, in the legal profession would be called sharp practice, or certainly you could say unfairness. So I'm trying to be very respectful to people's time and presence here today, but I'd like unanimous consent from our group to say we can now deal with that, because we certainly had enough things we could have worked on while I was doing the media interviews.
Mr. Wisniewski, please, and then Madame Lavadière.
Thank you,
Mr.
Chair.
O'Toole.
And to my colleague, Mr. O'Toole, this is an example of the government working collaboratively with the opposition on a very important piece of legislation. We've listened to witnesses, we've listened to the opposition parties' concerns, and in that spirit, we've proceeded with this. I believe that we should continue in that same spirit, and hopefully we'll see the same spirit displayed right around the table as we go through this whole process. So I would actually be supportive to allow, notwithstanding that, yes, Mr. O'Toole wasn't here when things started, but notwithstanding that, and regular procedures in the spirit of collaboration and cooperation, that we be able to proceed.
Madame Lavadière, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I understand very well that it isn't usual practice, but I think we all understand, as MPs around this table, that our lives are sometimes a little bit complicated, and that our first role and responsibility is to each of us, according to our vision, which is sometimes the same but not always, everything in our power to stand up for the interests of Canada and its citizens and workers. That's certainly an issue we can agree on. I want to highlight that I don't agree with the amendment that's been proposed, but I want to say that as a sign of respect due to the explanation we've been given, and also given the debates we've had for a number of weeks around this issue, I think it would be good to provide the opportunity to discuss this amendment. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Unanimous consent then to nullify the vote on Clause 5 and return to Clause 5. It's agreed? All right, the floor is yours, Mr. O'Toole, Clause 5.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, colleagues, for that indulgence. And I know certainly the members of the USW appreciate your understanding as well, Madame Lavadière. Certainly it did catch us by surprise, and that's why I apologize for being a bit tardy. As you will recall, colleagues, this amendment, this single and fairly simple amendment, was the result of considerable testimony provided by the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters, as well as the Canadian Sport Shooting Association. You'll recall from the debate at the time, and I appreciate that we have witnesses from the department here, because our professional civil service, which we've been talking about a lot in the House of Commons lately, how much high regard we have for our professionals. We're a part of United Nations discussions on the Arms Trade Treaty for many years. And we recall that the previous government had some concern that the preamble would not provide sufficient protection for cultural, Aboriginal sport shooting and hunting uses of legal firearms. So we tried to present a fairly simplistic way to provide that degree of clarity within the legislation itself. People may recall from the day we had those witnesses testifying on Bill C-47 that I quoted Professor Kent Roach from the University of Toronto Law School and his position with respect to preambles, which do not provide legal certainty when you can provide such legal certainty within the pith of the legislation. That's the intention here, friends and colleagues. The intention comes from direct consultations, particularly with the Federation of Anglers and Hunters, which I know the Minister's office has been in touch with respect to this bill. And I will say, and then I'll end and hear debate from my colleagues, that these are very specific exemptions that give the certainty that a wide cross-section of Canadians would like to see, because they agree with the spirit of this legislation. And as you recall, we did not march hundreds of witnesses. We tried to make sure that this was done in a respectful way to provide a degree of certainty that people in rural Canada, First Nations, sports shooters, those sorts of people can have by a direct provision in the Act. This gives them that clarity. It's been reviewed by the witnesses that appeared that day. It does not interfere with the intention and certainly the considerable commentary on what the intention of this legislation is with respect to conflict zones and violence around the world. So I would ask for you to consider this to give that large cross-section of Canadians the degree of certainty that I think both sides, I remember from our witnesses being here, wanted to see. There was a sense early on that the government might propose this themselves, and we would have enjoyed seeing that. Since they have not, I think in the spirit of cooperation that my friend Boris so eloquently expressed earlier, this modest clause could be accepted by all here today.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. O'Toole. Any further discussion? Mr. Levitt, and then Madame Lavadière.
So I was pleased to extend the spirit of cooperation to bringing this back onto the table, but I have to tell you, we heard repeatedly during testimony that Bill C-47 does not in any way create a burden on domestic gun owners through the brokering control list. The record-keeping requirements for importing or exporting controlled weapons already exist, and they are the same as they were under the previous government. These requirements of the Export and Import Permits Act, the EIPA, have been in place for 70 years. We've also heard that the ATT preamble very clearly recognizes, and I quote, legitimate trade and lawful ownership and use of certain conventional arms for recreational, cultural, historical, and sporting activities where such trade, ownership, and use are permitted or protected by law. The Conservatives have continuously raised the spectre, but I have to tell you, nowhere is this mentioned in the body, that it's simply untrue that this is at all the intent. I also want to recognize that Liberal Amendment number 2, which will be tabled shortly by MP Sidhu, he submitted an amendment that will add for greater certainty, confirm that Bill C-47 does not create any new regulatory burdens on domestic gun owners. And while we have some of the officials in the room, I also want to quote from Richard Arbeiter, who's the Director General of the International Security Policy Bureau. And I want to quote Mr. Arbeiter and say, when he said, the ATT does not impact, and I would like to underline this, domestic gun control laws or other firearm ownership policies. So I think we heard this repeatedly, and I would like to suggest that this particular amendment is not necessary in this situation, and I would like to encourage the members in this particular case to vote against this particular amendment.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Levitt. Madame Levitt-Diaz?
Oui, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Yes. Although I was willing to extend the spirit of collaboration to the point of discussing this amendment, unfortunately, it's an amendment that I won't be able to support. Before getting to the substance of the amendment, I'd like to say that, yes, it's true. With the previous government, oftentimes gun owner groups or sporting groups participated in negotiations in the United States. And I think that's wonderful. The more we include people from civil society in this type of negotiation, the better. However, there was a problem, which was that there were many other groups from civil society that were never invited. And I hope we'll avoid that type of selective attitude in the future. That being said, regarding the amendment itself, I think the amendment is not necessary. A number of witnesses, including witnesses from the arms industry, said themselves that this amendment wasn't necessary. I'd like to note Kristen Shefarani, I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, from the Canadian Association of Defense Industries and Security. So I'll quote her in English. She said to this committee,
"It would be unnecessary. The Arms Trade Treaty is about the international transfer of arms and ammunition between countries and territories that import, export, transit, and transship. It is not about domestic gun ownership. So I would see such wording as unnecessary." Le problème, c'est que si...
The problem is that if it were simply an unnecessary amendment, we could always say it's not necessary, but we can add things. We could add all sorts of things to the bill that don't have a direct link, a direct relationship with the Arms Trade Treaty. It'd be a funny bill, but sometimes we see budget bills that are in that vein. But in any case, the problem is that aside from being unnecessary, it could be used to circumvent the rules in the future. And the amendment itself doesn't recognize that provisions for brokering in the bill apply to exports and not domestic use. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Laverdiere. Ms. May.
Yeah, I'm enormously grateful, Mr. Chair, that you're allowing me to speak to this amendment because it is your discretion. I support this amendment. The mover may not appreciate it when I go on to say it's the silliest amendment I've ever seen. It's manifestly not only unnecessary, it's absurd. If you read the Arms Trade Treaty, it's clear that nothing in the Arms Trade Treaty could possibly apply to the categories of use covered by this amendment. There is malicious intent, not on the part of the mover, because he's a lovely man, but I find within the political partisan machinations around this bill that I wasted a lot of time in the House defending C-47 when I wanted to point out its loopholes, because I had to keep going back to the Arms Trade Treaty and reading out all the provisions to make it clear that this wasn't the gun registry domestically in disguise. The best way for all people around this table to ensure that this is never an election issue is to pass the silly amendment from the Conservative Party. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Aboutif,
Well,
please.
thanks, Ms. May, on behalf of my colleague, and I'm not so surprised by the position of Ms. Laverdiere. I heard the speeches. I spoke to this bill at the House of Commons, and one of the main areas that we raise all the time was this clause. And we got the assurance from the government side at all levels that no, this Bill C-47 will not come near or deny those amendments, or at least what that clause speak about. So I'm just refreshing the memory of the honorable colleagues on the government side over those discussions, and hopefully the assurance that we got during discussions will apply here, and they will agree to pass this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further debate, we will move to vote on Mr. O'Toole's amendment to
recorded vote?
Yes, you can.
Yeah, thank you.
We will move to vote on the amendment by Mr. O'Toole to Clause 5. This will be a recorded vote, so the clerk will take the vote.
Mr. Fragiscatos?
I oppose the amendment.
Mr. Levitt?
I oppose the amendment.
Mr. Sidhu?
I oppose the amendment.
Ms. Vandenbeld?
I oppose the amendment.
Mr. Jesnevsky?
Against.
Mr. Abultaif?
Yes.
Mr. O'Toole?
Yay.
Mr. Van Loan?
Yes.
Madame Laverdiere?
Je m'oppose à cet amendement.
I oppose this amendment.
And the amendment is defeated. So Clause 5 is carried as without amendment. Now we will go back to Clause 8, which is an amendment by Madame Laverdiere that Bill C-47 Clause 8 be amended by adding after line 22 on page 4 the following. So I turn the floor over to Madame Laverdiere.
Oui, écoutez,
Mr. Chair, earlier, perhaps I spoke a bit too quickly. Given the fact that some of the amendments proposed by the Liberal side cover the substance of what we wanted to accomplish through this amendment, I'm willing to withdraw this amendment. But I would like to say once again that on these points, even though it's not complete, I'm glad to see these few improvements to the bill that we are studying, given that the bill would need many more improvements, but we can discuss that later.
Proposed, Madame Laverdiere is withdrawn. So we will now go to Mr. Theriault and the amendment to Clause 8 by adding after line 22 and page 4 the following, and we'll turn it over to Mr. Theriault.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to reassure my colleagues the goal has three principles that are very virtuous for parliamentarians. So, greater balance between the executive and the legislative power, greater accountability, And more accountability means more parliamentary control by parliamentarians and more transparency. Currently, the enforcement is only in the hands of the government. There's no parliamentary control aside through question period. We saw that with Saudi Arabia. What we'd like to introduce here is that when the committee feels that a country's situation changes and the exporting of military material should stop, the committee can produce a report, table it in the House, and call for the suspension or the cancellation of the permit. If the minister doesn't follow up, the minister would have to explain in the House. And at that point, the executive power, the amendment doesn't take the executive powers away. It's simply calling on the executive to justify things in Parliament, which reaches those three goals I explained: accountability, transparency, and a greater balance between the executive and the legislative.
Mr. Wisniewski?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And with respect, I'd just like to point out that this particular amendment actually has a redundancy in it, because committees are the masters of their own destiny, and committees choose their own areas of study. It isn't just in question period that we can have answers. Committees, in fact, have the ability and don't require legislation to tell them what they should or should not be studying. So there's a redundancy in this particular amendment when it comes to that particular issue. And there's also a concern because it seems to apply a certain onus, and there is commercial confidentiality in many of these cases. It's a very competitive business, and departments have to review confidential information in sometimes very strategic areas. So there's a problem with that particular aspect as well. Consequently, I would suggest that this is not an amendment that we can support.
Okay. Madame Lavillière.
Monsieur le Président.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Contrary to my colleagues opposite, this is an amendment that we are willing to support, certainly. Mr. Chair, we've made a number of attempts to try to create accountability, a sort of supervision by Parliament over this important issue of arms exports. It's an issue that's of great concern to Canadians. We've seen too many cases in recent years, in recent months, whether it be Saudi Arabia, or selling helicopters to the Philippines, or other issues where there are major problems. It's not a small fringe of the population concerned about this. It's a significant share. We suggested a solution that seemed simple, effective, that would have worked very well in creating transparency, which is something the government often talks about, but which we don't always see the effects of. That is to say, to create a sort of subcommittee with people from the defense industry, from foreign affairs, to periodically review what happens in the area of arms exports from Canada. Unfortunately, I think some of my colleagues opposite may not have been there when we voted on that a number of times through different versions of it. Unfortunately, it was refused, but there are examples. Great Britain has a committee of this type. There are examples that we could easily follow. That would be the ideal solution. A committee that could look at these issues on an ongoing basis. They could look at particular cases and also trends, why have our exports in arms to the Middle East doubled? Why do we sell more to the Middle East than NATO countries? We could have done that, but despite what my colleague has said, there may be issues of confidentiality for trade issues. But there are some parts that are very clear. To mention Saudi Arabia again, we don't need to have all of the financial details. We can examine the situation in the country, the risks of Canadian arms being used. Canada could be complicit in what's happening in Yemen, which would be horrible for our reputation. So I think parliamentarians can and they must work on this. It's our role. It's our role as spokespeople for Canadians who are very much concerned about these situations. So, Mr. Chair, since we don't have a committee that would be able to study these issues, I think my colleague's idea, my colleague from the Groupe Parlementaire Québécois, we'll get used to that title. We'll get used to this new expression. I think it's a half measure, but at least it's something. And I think this committee should support this amendment. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Ms. Laverdière. Mr. Thériault. As additional information, Mr. Chair, and with all due respect to my distinguished colleague, I think as soon as the minister is obliged to justify a response to the committee's initiative, I think that gives a bit more power, as citizens would like to see, to the legislative branch, which in a parliament like ours always has a lot of difficulty taking on its role. The executive takes up all of the legislative space, and I think it's important in areas that are as important as these ones. Citizens would be pleased to see this. There would be greater accountability, greater balance between the branches of government. It's desirable, and I don't see how it would call into question the process in place.
Pierre, would like to add more?
Oui, brièvement, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, briefly, Mr. Chair. I forgot to mention the issue of confidentiality, trade secrets, but there's example in Great Britain. They have this type of committee. There are examples that exist, and in Great Britain, they respect trade secrets and confidentiality, so it's possible to do so while respecting confidentiality. Thank you.
Colleagues, you've heard the discussion on the amendment proposed to Clause 8 by Mr. Thériault. All those in favor?
Est-ce qu'on peut avoir un vote?
Can I ask a recorded division?
Yeah.
Je
Would you
voudrais,
like?
s'il vous plaît.
All right.
Yes.
Recorded, please, to the amendment put forward by Mr. Thériault. Clerk, please.
Mr. Fragiscatos.
I oppose the amendment and would direct my colleagues to recent findings on what has actually taken place in Saudi Arabia. Okay, I oppose the amendment.
Mr. Levitt.
I oppose the amendment.
Mr. Sidhu.
Against it.
Ms. Vandenbeld. I vote nay. Mr. Jesnevsky.
Against.
Mr. Abul Taif.
No.
Mr. O'Toole.
No.
Mr. Van Loan. No. Madame Laverdière.
J'appuie cet amendement.
Support this amendment.
Okay, based on the recorded vote, the amendment is lost. So we'll go to Clause 8 as amended. So shall Clause 8 as amended carry? Agreed? Agreed. Shall Clause 9 carry? Carried. New clause 9.1 as presented by Madame Lavidière. So the floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The first amendment I'll be able to discuss with a bit more substance. So I hope I'll have my colleagues' understanding on this amendment, which I think is extremely important. In fact, this amendment, and it's a crucial point, this amendment says that when circumstances change on the ground, the minister must reevaluate export permits. First, it really reflects Section 7 of the Arms Trade Treaty, which says, and I apologize, I have the text only in English with me. I feel really guilty as a Francophone. I only have the treaty's text in English, but I'll go ahead and read from the treaty.
After an authorization has been granted, an exporting state party becomes aware of new relevant information. It is encouraged to reassess the authorization after consultations, if appropriate, with the importing state. Moi, ça me semble très clair.
That seems very clear to me. If there's new information that comes to light, if circumstances change on the ground, the minister must reevaluate the authorization that was granted. I was very troubled, Mr. Chair, when we heard from the minister a few weeks ago before the committee, who seemed to indicate I may have misunderstood. If I did, I'm open to clarification. The minister seemed to say that she wasn't open to reevaluating some files. Once again, it seems very clear. There's the case of Saudi Arabia, where we've seen video of Canadian arms that look like Canadian arms in the eastern part of the country, in Yemen. These are new pieces of information on the ground, and it's essential in order to not only talk about human rights, but to take action to defend human rights in the world. It's absolutely essential that when things like this happen, that we reevaluate things. It's something we do on a daily basis. When we receive new information that contradicts something that we had based a decision on, we reevaluate our decision. So it's just common sense. Furthermore, Section 7 of the Arms Trade Treaty is very clear on this. So why would we include some aspects of the Arms Trade Treaty in the bill, but not others? I can't see why. If someone would like to explain that state of affairs to me, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Discussion, Mr. Reznicki, please.
Thank you, Chair. Once again, I appreciate the spirit with which this amendment was proposed, and I believe it actually speaks to the spirit with which this legislation is being proposed. It clearly speaks to the minister having to see whether or not he or she would amend, suspend. It provides different ways that the minister can react if circumstances change. And that's a very important tool for a minister to have at her or his disposal, because it helps us to negotiate if sometimes we think things are heading perhaps in a direction that we don't believe is the right direction. The way this is worded, that opportunity is taken off the table. The minister has no opportunity to negotiate, to use diplomacy to say, listen, we don't particularly like what or the direction which a country is taking. And removing that opportunity for diplomacy and to influence people that we might be cooperating with in a positive way, I'm not sure that, although I understand the spirit with which this amendment is proposed, I'm not sure it actually helps us in those sets of circumstances. And when wording in legislation is so stark, it creates additional difficulties. If there's positive change, well, the minister must react. So do we increase our cooperation? Or it's not the way we typically would word things, and it also removes our ability to actually influence events should they be heading in a direction that we do not like. But I would once again suggest that we look at the spirit of how all of this legislation has been put together and worded. I think our intent is quite clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Madame Lavadière.
Oui.
Yes. There's a fundamental problem here. Currently in the bill, there's nothing that says that the minister must reevaluate when the situation on the ground changes. It's a case, and there are a number that have been addressed, but not enough. Once again, it's a case where the bill before us not only doesn't respect the spirit of the treaty, but it doesn't respect the letter of the treaty. Mr. Chair, I would like to reread Section 7.
Authorization has been granted. An exporting state party becomes aware of new relevant information. It is encouraged to reassess the authorization after consultations, if appropriate, with the importing state. Et d'un point de vue pratico...
From a very practical point of view, in negotiations, because my colleague seems to be saying that if we do this, it takes the minister's power away to negotiate. That's not correct. I think it's the opposite. I think it's Churchill who said...
A big stick?
No, totally.
Roosevelt. Roosevelt, okay.
Teddy
Roosevelt.
Okay, okay.
Peter
Sorry.
and I agree on something. It was Teddy Roosevelt.
Teddy Roosevelt. Je suis désolée, j'ai une mauvaise...
I apologize. I have a bad habit of attributing all sorts of quotes to Mr. Churchill. But the fact that the minister can say, no, I can't issue a permit in these circumstances, or I will have to reevaluate permits, that's a tool for the minister to apply pressure on countries where there are developments that we are not in agreement with. Thank you.
Substantial discussion on
Mr.
a new
Chair, if I-
clause. Mr. Fragaskatos, please.
I could add one quick comment. I'm not a sitting member of this committee, but I do take a tremendous interest in its work. Just in case there's any confusion, I think for the record it should be clarified that a recent independent objective opinion offered by Canadian public servants makes clear that there is no evidence that Canadian light armored vehicles were used to perpetrate human rights abuses in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has come up here a number of times I think there's a need to clarify that important point.
Okay, thank you. Having heard substantial discussion on the amendment proposed by Madame Lavidière of creating a new clause 9.1, let's go to the vote. All those in favor? Recorded vote. We will go to a recorded vote. Colleagues, the clerk.
The vote is on the new clause. Mr. Fragiscatos.
I'm not in favor of the amendment.
Mr. Levitt.
I vote nay.
Mr. Sidhu.
Against it.
Ms. Vandenbeld.
I vote nay.
Mr. Jesnowski.
Against.
Mr. Abultaif.
No.
Mr. O'Toole.
No.
Mr. Van Loan.
No.
Madame Laverdière.
Oui.
Yes.
Heard the vote. The amendment is defeated. We will now go to clause 10. Seeing no discussion, it's carried. Clause 11, there is a Liberal amendment under the name of Mr. Sidhu, and so we will turn the floor over to Mr. Sidhu, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think by amending this a clause that might help my colleague across the aisle there, what he was trying to accomplish a little earlier in paragraph 5. So my amendment is in clause 11 to be amended by adding after line 6 on page 6 the following. For the greater certainty, this section applies in respect of firearms only if the firearms included in the export control list, brokering control list, or import control list, and it is the subject of an application or a permit, certificate, or other authorization under this Act. Bit of a clarification on this amendment, Mr. Chair. This is for a great certainty clause that addresses the concern raised by Canadian Sporting Association and Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters. It makes certain that brokering control does not include record keeping for firearms that are not being brokered, moved from third country to another third country. As confirmed by testimony from officials before this committee on Bill C-47, it is not affecting the domestic use of guns. Record keeping as required for importing, exporting firearms are not introduced in Bill C-47 that exists since 1947, even under the government of Conservative Party. This clause will provide greater certainty on those points, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Mr. O'Toole, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank my friend, Mr. Sidhu, for the amendment. Colleagues, I haven't been in politics too long, but my time in government taught me that usually when a government wants to usurp an idea from the opposition or from stakeholders and claim credit for it, they vote down the Conservative amendment. But normally you then introduce an amendment that stakeholders actually want. This wasn't the amendment stakeholders wanted, and I think that is not lost on my friend. I do think it's less than they wanted. It's something. But considering we thought that there was going to be as Ms. May suggested, just removing the politics from this entirely and just moving on, I was a little disappointed that it wasn't what the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters and the Sports Shooting Association wanted. So disappointing, but what's the term? Better than nothing, I guess. So I wanted to thank my colleague for at least having something. I do think it would be important for the minister and perhaps the parliamentary secretary to explain after the delay and the appearance of our witnesses, and I do know they've contacted the witnesses. I think it'd be important for them to explain why they did not proceed in a fashion that gave the witnesses certainty But at the very least, at least this is something.
Okay, Madame Lavadière.
Merci, Monsieur le.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would you prefer me to make my comment now or have the other side respond to my colleague Aaron O'Toole's? Okay. Look, I oppose this amendment first and foremost because, as I've said when I talked about the conservative amendment, it's an amendment that simply isn't necessary given the nature of the Arms Trade Treaty. And it's rather ironic to see my colleagues opposite, who've said for weeks that the Arms Trade Treaty wouldn't affect individual owners. We've heard a lot of witnesses speak about this, and then all of a sudden we see this amendment. It's a bit of a strange situation, but perhaps they'll explain that. So this amendment doesn't seem necessary to me. And furthermore, it removes the obligation to report for sales of arms or transfers of arms which aren't subject to permits, certificate, or other authorization. The problem with this, and it's a fundamental issue in this bill, the problem is that it exempts all sales of arms to the United States. And that's something that we do not agree with. I think it would be essential to have much greater transparency and comprehensive reports on our sales of arms to the United States. Exempting the United States from that goes against Section 5 and 12 of the Arms Trade Treaty. Section 5, which says,
Party shall implement this treaty in consistent, objective, and non-discriminatory manner, bearing in mind the principles referred to in this treaty. L'article 5 dit...
Section 5. Section 12, rather, says each member state, based on its legislation and its regulations at the domestic level, has registries of exports or effective exports of classic arms under Section 2. So there's no reason to exempt our arms exports to the United States. The Arms Trade Treaty is very clear on this. It's effective exports, and it should cover our exports to the United States. I'd also like to read what Andrew Stobo-Snyderman said. He was the human rights advisor for the previous Foreign Affairs Minister, Stéphane Dion. Here's what he said on the topic, since we didn't have the opportunity to have him here at committee. Mr. Snitterman, I apologize for my pronunciation,
says its new legislation to implement the International Arms Trade Treaty will increase transparency and accountability. That would be welcome news, given that we are talking about how Canada sells weapons that kill people. Unfortunately, the proposed legislation leaves an exception as big as the rule. Canada sends about half its arms exports to the United States, maybe more, maybe less, nobody really knows. That is because current rules do not require reporting on arms sales to the United States. It is probably more than you think, and our hands may be dirtier than you know. There are two main reasons given in support of our current approach. First, it is best for business. The border barely exists for the defense industry, and that is the way integrated supply chains want in. Many jobs, families, and seats in the House of Commons depend on the seamless flow of military goods and often parts and components.
Point of order, Chair.
Mr. Wisniewski, please.
Although this is all very interesting, I don't see the relevance to the particular amendment that's before us presently.
Okay. Madame Lavadière, you're going to wrap it up at some point?
Yes, I'm nearly finished. It's not very long, and I think it's very relevant to the current because it talks about exempting those who don't need, that are not subject of an application for permit, certificate, and other authorization under the law, and that's about half of our exports and our exports to the United States. So I think this is very pertinent. Thank you. Second, we like and trust the United States. Sure, Americans are the world's largest arms dealers and consistently provide weapons to useful monsters. And yes, for those who care to inquire, it is rather easy to find American-made weapons shooting, bombing, and crushing civilians worldwide. But the Americans are our buddies, and they pay a lot of bills, so there are clear incentives to suggest their arms export policy is more defensible than it really is. I am not arguing, and let me remind everybody that we're talking about the former human rights advisor to Minister Dion. I am not arguing that arms should never be sold and believe that properly regulated arms sales can be justified. Canadian weapons empower some dubious allies, but our enemies are often worse. But the sale of weapons is clearly the kind of thing that must be tightly regulated. They are by nature dangerous and liable to misuse. As we benefit from their sale, we have a responsibility to minimize harm. Profit is complicity. As the human rights policy advisor to this government's previous foreign affairs minister, my job was to ask questions like, if we really believe in increasing transparency and accountability in Canadian arms sales, does it make sense to exempt all sales to our biggest customer by far? Or shouldn't Canadians know more, for example, about how Americans are selling Super Tucano ground attack aircraft with Canadian-made engines to Nigeria? Fearsome military planes for an often ruthless government powered by the maple leaf. This is business as usual, and we keep no public record of it. Whether or not...
Can I inject a point of order? I'm sorry to interrupt.
Mr. Fragaskatos, point of order.
I think the point has been made that Ms. Lavadière is clear in the argument. We know where it's going. I go back to what my colleague, Mr. Wisniewski, said, and I think, frankly, we should call the question.
I'm sorry, je suis désolé, Monsieur le Président.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. My understanding is that in this type of situation, there is no time limit for a member of the committee. So I'm almost done.
It's unlimited. If the committee wishes to pass a motion to restrict the time for clauses, they certainly can do so. We've not chosen to do that, but if it's shown to be an abuse of that, then the members can move a motion to reduce the amount of time for each clause, and it's been done many times before. So I just want for the record to let you know, so please wrap it up.
Okay. Alors, je vais m'arranger.
Okay. I will distribute this very interesting article to my colleagues. It raises the important point that we have no transparency on over half of our arms exports, and it's a very serious problem, Mr. Chair.
It's his amendment. I'd like to give him the floor before we move the question.
Thank you to my colleague actually bringing USA in, but my amendment is strictly the witnesses, stakeholders' response, and then we wanted to make sure that their concern is addressed. Just want to repeat this, that this Bill C-47 will not affect domestic use of guns, and the record keeping is not required in this since it's there since 1947. That's the whole guts of the amendment. Like Madam Lavadier is going on a different path, so I'll call the question.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sidhu. We've had a very robust discussion on this particular amendment put by Mr. Sidhu. All those in, we will have an accorded vote. The clerk.
The vote is on the amendment Lib 2. Mr. Fragiscatos.
I support the amendment.
Mr. Levitt.
I vote yay.
Mr. Sidhu.
Yes.
Ms. Vandenbeld.
Vote yay.
Mr. Jesnewski.
Yes.
Mr. Abul Taif.
Yeah, in light of the last assurance from Mr. Sidhu, yes.
Mr. Schmale.
Yes.
Mr. Van Loan.
Yes.
Madame Laverdiere.
No.
No.
Okay, thank you. The clause 11 as amended is carried. We will now go to clause 12, and you'll notice that the Liberals' third amendment is consequential, so it is approved. So we will now go to the NDP's fourth amendment, and it is under Madame Lavadiere. So Bill C-47, Clause 12, be amended by deleting lines 26 to 29. On page 6, the floor is yours, Madame Lavadiere.
Merci.
Thank you. The purpose of this amendment is to take out lines that suggest adding organizations to a list of exemptions. Exemptions to the bill on arms exports and imports. I have a problem with adding these organizations, the word organizations. It's very vague, first. I don't think we were told why it was included in C-47. And we've seen, with the case of the sale of helicopters to the Philippines, that it was the Canadian corporate company, the CCC, that was involved. So it's an organization. So is the door being open to such entities being able to circumvent the system that we want to put in place? Quite sincerely, I don't think there should be such exemptions, especially since the treaty indicates that it must apply universally without exemptions. And that's another flaw in the bill. It doesn't at all address the CCC. It doesn't talk about the Defense Department. We saw the case of the sale of helicopters to the Philippines. But how many other potential cases exist? So I don't see the need to do this, and to add exemptions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further discussion? Mr. Levitt, please.
Yeah, so I think with the way this amendment is written, removing the word organization creates some problems. Removing Section 12 from the EIPA would be highly impractical. The EIPA deals with regulations not just for conventional arms, but also for things like softwood lumber, meat products, sugar, eggs, and even peanut butter. Reducing the government's ability to create exemptions could cause problems for cross-border trade. And I think if we want to look at other examples of other countries, for example, the Netherlands does not require a permit for any transfers to Belgium and Luxembourg and vice versa. I think for low-risk countries, we need to be able to continue to have that option available. And Canada and US have a highly integrated market. The permit-free movement of goods and for the benefit of the Canadian economy is long-standing and something that we need to make sure this does not impede.
Okay. Further discussion. Madame Lavidière.
Je suis désolée, Monsieur le Président.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, but I think there's some confusion here, because it's not about taking words out of the existing act. It's about taking words out from additions that Bill C-47 would introduce. That is, it has no effect on the transportation of wood or steel. I see that my colleague looks concerned. We're talking about additions that Bill C-47 would make that we don't want to do. We wouldn't be changing the current act. I know my colleague will discuss this more, but before he takes the floor again, I'd like to take this opportunity to say, quite sincerely, and I'm not the only one to say so, many experts have said that comparing trade between Belgium and Luxembourg with trade between Canada and the United States in the area of the arms trade isn't quite analogous. We can always find someone who isn't doing things correctly, but that's no excuse. But I see that my colleague would like to discuss the topic again.
I thank my honourable colleagues' comments there, but I have to say, the ATT requires that state parties assess all potential exports. It does not rule out the use of expedited procedures for low-risk countries. And again, that, I think, brings great relevance to the examples given. Having said that, because there seems to be concern around what the intent of this amendment is in terms of adding or subtracting language, I'm wondering if we can maybe, if I can indulge the officials to just give us some clarity on this point.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the members for the opportunity. So the amendment that is proposed in Bill C-47 is simply to add organizations into the existing language in the Act itself, the Export and Import Permits Act, because when we're considering brokering could cover the activities of partnerships and other types of organizations beyond simply the definition of person in the Act, which is a company incorporated under the laws of Canada. Just to note, when we did a historical search of the use of this particular provision in the Act, the only time a regulation has been established to exempt certain persons from the EIPA is those while acting in the course of their employment. For example, certain employees of a foreign state, visiting forces, air marshals, etc., and certain Canadian officials acting in the course of other pieces of legislation. So that is the only time that an exemption has been enacted as a regulation under this Act.
Okay. Any further discussion? Madame Lavidière.
Alors donc, je pense que ça...
So I think that confirms my point. The intention in Bill C-47 that we have before us is to add an exemption for organizations And we don't want that exemption to be added to the existing act. Given that we have some former colleagues here, people from Global Affairs Canada, it's always a pleasure to see you. I'd like to have confirmation that this would also cover entities like the Canadian Commercial Corporation.
I won't touch it, I promise. The Export and Import Permits Act does not cover the activities of the Crown, and as a Crown corporation, the Canadian Commercial Corporation is not covered by the EIPA.
Okay. Having heard robust discussion, we'll now move to put the question to the amendment to Bill C-47, Clause 12 by Madame Lavidière. Would you like a recorded vote, Madame Lavidière? Okay, a recorded vote it shall be. Clerk, please.
The vote is on the amendment to Clause 12, NDP 4. Mr. Fragiscatos.
I oppose the amendment.
Mr. Lovett.
I oppose the amendment.
Mr. Sidhu.
Against it.
Ms. Vandenbeld.
Nay.
Mr. Jesnevsky.
Against.
Mr. Abultaif.
No.
Mr. Schmale.
No.
Mr. Van Loan.
No.
Madame Laverdière.
Oui.
Yes.
The amendment is defeated. So we will now go to NDP 5, which is the next amendment put forward by Madame Lavidière, that Bill C-47 Clause 12 be amended by adding after line 32 on page 6 the following, and it's quite extensive, so I'll turn it over to Madame Lavidière.
OK. En fait, cet amendement...
This amendment sets out an obligation that all regulations, and during our discussions on this bill, we discussed adding things in the regulations at length. We were always told by the government side that it was more flexible, more practical, this and that. So this amendment, in order to ensure that there really is transparency, this amendment calls on the government to table in the House, in Parliament, the regulations, and that these regulations be brought before committee so that committee can consider them before they come into force. I think it's an amendment that should be agreeable to all. We have a government that always says they want to have open and transparent government and parliament, and I think this is a step in that direction to ensure that parliamentarians can really examine this file in depth. Thank you.
Madame Vandenbeld, please.
Yes, thank you. I commend the spirit, of course, again, of this particular amendment. But now that my amendment, Lib 1, has passed and actually put the text in the legislation as opposed to regulations, I think that the need for this amendment, I think it was really when we were looking at having it all in regulations and then having a chance to be able to scrutinize that. Having said that, I also note that we have a parliamentary committee for the scrutiny of regulations. Committees can take up that kind of study at any time. It actually does create restrictions on the executive powers of the governor and council, so there are technical problems with this particular amendment. But I also think that it isn't needed really as much because we've now taken the bulk of it, Article 7, out of the regulations and we've put it into the legislation.
Madame Lavidière, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I don't understand. Quite sincerely, there seem to be contradictions here. We've been told for weeks that the criteria should be put in regulations, because it provided more flexibility, and at some point something may be added, and so on. Now, we've agreed that criteria that are in the treaty will be in the law, in the act. That's great, because the treaty won't be changing overnight. But I had understood from the government side that they wanted to retain flexibility. They wanted to be able to add new criteria, and that those new criteria, well, it would be too complicated to put them in a bill. So if there are criteria that go beyond the Arms Trade Treaty that are added, they would be added through regulations. And this point covers that, having subsequent regulations, and it provides for more transparency because it really allows the Foreign Affairs Committee to study the issue. And it does so in public. We've already rejected the Bloc Québécois amendment for having a system set out so that parliamentarians, and especially parliamentarians on this committee, have the opportunity to study these issues in more depth. That was rejected. This is another effort, a simple one, to ensure that transparency, that follow-up from the part of parliamentarians. I'd also like to know why all of a sudden there's no longer a desire for flexibility for criteria when we heard for weeks that it was very important. Thank you.
Just very quickly, I go back to the fact that we have a committee, a parliamentary committee that does scrutinize regulations, but there are some technical issues with this amendment, and I don't know if the officials want to go into details about it, but for instance, you know, the requirement that a regulation can only be made 30 sitting days after being tabled, well, then you have the problem that regulations couldn't be made when the House isn't sitting during the summer, and, you know, there's issues with this particular one, and I do think that Parliament's ability to scrutinize regulations is already very, very well set out. So I don't see that this is necessary.
Okay. Seeing no further discussion, we've had a robust discussion on NDP Amendment 5. A recorded vote, Madame Lavadière? Okay, so we will move to put the question. Madam Clerk.
The vote is on Amendment NDP 5 on Clause 12. Mr. Fragiscatos.
Against.
Mr. Levitt.
Against.
Mr. Sidhu.
Against.
Ms. Van den Beld.
Against.
Mr. Jesnevsky.
Against.
Mr. Abultaif.
Against.
Mr. Schmale.
Against.
Mr. Van Loan.
No.
Madame Lavertia.
Je vote pour cet amendement.
I vote for this amendment.
Defeated.
Thank you. The amendment is defeated. And we will now move to carry Clause 12 without amendment. As amended, sorry. All those in favor, it's agreed. Colleagues, I want to ask if you would agree to carry clauses 13 to 20 as there are no amendments. With your agreement, carried with no amendments. So we are now on clause 21 and we turn the floor over to Mr. Theriault or
Marie.
Mr. St. Marie. Pardon me? Chunk of clause by chunk of clause, if that's the wish of the committee. Mr. St. Marie, please.
Oui. Alors, bonjour tout le monde.
Good afternoon, everyone. Mr. Chair, Parliamentary Secretary, dear colleagues. Here in this amendment, first, to provide some context, the government publishes a report on the export of military equipment from the previous year. Since it's already been done, the information arrives too late for it to be useful for raising any problems. Here, we want more transparency. More transparency echoes requests from groups like Oxfam, Project Plowshare, and Amnesty International, who met with the minister's representatives for discussions on this. The amendment calls for a report to be tabled in the House every month with details on exports authorized the previous month. So it's a measure of transparency, which is indispensable for public debate for any democratic society. So it would be done every month. Even if you say there are many authorizations, if every month the government can provide those authorizations, the government is also able to table this every month. It's not a technical mountain compared to what's already being done. Despite the amendments that have already been voted on today, the government still has discretion despite what's been voted on today. So what we're asking is for information, quite simply, to do follow-up in real time rather than a year later when it's too late. Thank you.
Marie, any further discussion? Mr. Wisniewski, please.
Yes, once again, I would ask our bloc colleagues to take a look at the intent and what we've done with the legislation the way we've proposed. Previously, there was no onus on the minister to report. It was voluntary. This legislation makes it mandatory. And the importance of doing this on a regularly scheduled annual basis is the tabling of this report, I believe, will become a very important date in the parliamentary calendar. That Parliament, the NGO community will watch very carefully and be seized with the matter. Having to, every time there's an export permit issued, every time having to, within 30 days to table, shipments may take 30 days to arrive at their location. We don't know whether or not sometimes equipment might be stockpiled for 3 months, 6 months, and the intent of greater oversight will in fact be lost, and you would have pro forma tabling of reports on export permits on a monthly basis. I understand what the intent is, and I actually agree with the intent, but I believe an annual mandatory report from the minister to Parliament will become a very important tool for Parliament to review arms trade and for the NGO community as well. Although I support the intent, I cannot support this amendment.
Okay. Any further discussion? Madame Lavadière.
Oui, Monsieur le Président, moi.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I support this amendment. I think it would add transparency to the process, and we see, following discussions we've had today, it's the minimum level of transparency we could ask for. I don't think the government can say, look, voluntarily we're adding transparency, because the basic criteria of transparency of the treaty are not even being respected. I'll apologize in advance, but there's nothing to brag about here. So, in fact, we seem to be hearing that everything's transparent, but I'll say it again because it's so important. All exports to the United States are not included. We have no information on exports to the United States. It may be more or less than 50% of our exports, and that's not included. So if we can add transparency, I think that's an excellent idea. And I have no concern regarding NGOs. The ones I know are very efficient and effective. And I'm pretty sure they'd be very pleased to have regular reports rather than a yearly report, which often arrives late. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You've heard a robust debate on the amendment proposed by Mr. St. Marie, and now we'll go to pose the question. All those...
Registered vote, please.
Recorded vote, Madam Clerk.
The vote is on Amendment GPQ3 on Clause 21. Mr. Fragis-Skatos.
Against.
Mr. Levitt.
I will
Did I
be
surprise
voting
you?
nay.
Mr. Sidhu.
Against.
Ms. Vandenbeld.
Nay.
Mr. Jesnevsky.
Against.
Mr. Abul Taif.
No.
Mr. Schmale.
No.
Mr. Van Loan.
No.
Madame Lavertia.
J'appuie cet amendement.
Support this amendment.
The amendment is lost. So we will now go to NDP Amendment 6, which is in the same clause and put forward by Madame Lavadière. Floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment seeks to ensure that the Arms Trade Treaty Implementation Act reflects, at least in part, the spirit and the letter of said treaty. Without at least having information on exports to the United States, this bill totally fails in respecting the spirit and the letter of the Arms Trade Treaty. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Vanderbilt, please.
Yes, given the very eloquent intervention of Ms. Laverdure earlier, it was very clear that obviously this kind of thing is actually, for good or for bad, we could debate that, but I don't think this is the time and place, not actually tracked. And so the fact that there's something that's not tracked makes it very hard to report on something that isn't tracked. So I actually think this amendment is completely impractical. It can't actually work because it's impossible to report on something that isn't currently tracked.
Okay, last point by Madame Lavadière.
It should be tracked.
Thank you. I understand this will be a recorded vote, so we will go to amendment of the NDP 6 for a recorded vote. Madam Clerk.
Okay. The vote is on NDP 6 on Clause 21. Mr. Fragiscatos.
I'm against the amendment.
Mr. Levitt.
I will be voting nay.
Mr. Sidhu.
Against.
Ms. Vandenbeld.
Against.
Mr. Jesnevsky.
Against.
Mr. Abul Taif.
No.
Mr. Schmale.
No.
Mr. Van Loan.
No.
Madame Lavertia.
Oui.
Yes.
So the amendment is defeated, so we will now go to vote on Clause 21. Is it carried? Carried. Clause 22, is it carried? Carried. Clause 23, is it carried? Carried. Shall Clause 24 carry? Carried. Shall the title carry? Carried. Shall the bill as amended carry? Carried. Shall the chair report the bill as amended to the House? Carried. Shall the committee order a reprint of the bill as amended for the use of the House at report stage? Carried. Colleagues, that concludes our business of C-47. I want to thank you very much for a very decent discussion about a very important matter to Canada and the Arms Trade Treaty. Colleagues, before you leave, we're going to go into camera for 5 minutes, just because we have no choice. So I would ask, we have 10 minutes before we have to wrap up, but I think I can do it in 2 minutes. And so I would just ask all of those who don't belong when we're in camera to have a nice day, and thank you very much for your participation. And to the officials, Ms. Gilmore and your colleagues, thank you very much. It was an honor to work with you. And we will move to go in camera, and we will take a couple minutes to clear the room, and then we'll get right to it.